All right, folks, welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Hickory Hunts. This week, we're going to look for hickories on eBay. This is probably the first place that people look when they're first getting interested in hickory golf. This is where I first looked for clubs when I got interested in hickory golf. And I made some mistakes in those initial purchases that I'm going to try to help you avoid. I also just want to give you, an idea, a lay of the land, as so to speak, of what it looks like looking for, searching for and buying clubs on eBay. I don't personally buy any clubs off of eBay anymore unless I see a really good deal or a club that I think is particularly interesting. Most of my purchases are in person these days from people who sell on eBay. And I'm going to single out one of those sellers in this video when I come across their listing. Yeah, generally, I just want to kind of do an overview in this first one, but I think we'll do these, we'll do several of these going forward because there's always interesting stuff on eBay. And even though I don't buy clubs off of eBay, I visit and look for clubs every day just to keep myself educated as to what's out there, what the market is for certain clubs. It's a great place to learn about what clubs are out there, what they should be selling for, what you should be paying for them, all of that stuff. So yeah, I definitely recommend you make it a regular habit as a hickory golfer and a collector to go to eBay and look for clubs and just browse and just educate yourself on what you see. But if you are interested in buying some clubs, I'm going to give you some tips today. So I guess we'll start first with search terms. The best thing I think eBay is good for are finding clubs that are kind of under the radar because the person who's selling them doesn't know exactly what they have. That's can be a good thing and a bad thing for you as a buyer if you're not educated. So say you're an estate sale picker and you come across some golf clubs and you know they're old, but you don't know anything else about them. You have to put yourself in their shoes and kind of think, how would they list those clubs on eBay to try to sell them? Well, they would look for some things that they could use on the club head that they can read, or they would look at the shaft to see if there's anything on the shaft, or they would just look and see, oh, well, this is a wooden shaft, so I'm going to use that in my description. So let's use that term first and see what comes up. So wooden shaft golf club. Let's say plural golf clubs. So we've got some listings here. One thing I recommend you do if you make it a regular habit of going to eBay to look for clubs is toggle this from best match to newly listed, because then when you come back tomorrow, you won't have to look through everything that you looked through the day before. So just kind of scrolling through here, let's see what we find. As I come across listings that help me demonstrate something, I'll click on those. And if any of these listings are yours and I say something negative, I apologize. I'm not trying to call anyone out. I'm just trying to educate folks as to what they should be looking for. And hopefully, if you are a seller, give you an idea of what kind of information we're looking for as buyers to help everybody out. All right. So here's the first listing I want to kind of single out. This says rare original wooden shaft leather grip Otey Crisman 21H putter. These clubs trip people up all the time because while it is a hickory shaft, that is real wood, it's not pyrotone or anything, it's a wooden shaft. Photos aren't great here, but you can see enough that is a wooden shaft. The problem with these clubs as far as hickory golf is concerned is that they were made well after the hickory era. Otey Crisman was based in Alabama, was making these clubs as early as the 1940s into the 1960s, but they do not qualify as pre-1935 hickory shafted golf clubs. So yeah, bear that in mind. I have a couple Otey Crisman putters, and I like how they roll the ball, but if I was trying to fill out a hickory golf set for actual society hickory golfer play, I wouldn't want to put one of these clubs in my bag because it's not legal. So common club that messes people up or trips people up when they're first starting out collecting clubs. Even though it's wooden shaft, this is not of the hickory era. So let's go back out here to our results, see what else that we come across. Here's another one. This is another one that trips people up. All right, so we've got Spalding, Robert T. Jones tournament model, 6-iron, right-handed, wooden shaft. I can tell you right now, without even looking at this shaft, that that is not a wooden shafted golf club. We'll click on this and I'll show you why. Uh, so let's see, there's anything specific here. 7 out of 5, or 7.5 out of 10, slick grip, review all photos, item specifics. All right, I'll talk about that in a second. Let's look at the photos. So I know that this isn't a Bobby Jones, wooden shafted Bobby Jones club, but that's because I've seen a lot of these clubs. How would you be able to determine the difference? Well, this is right here. This is the telltale photo that what you're looking at is actually a Pyratone, so a plastic-coated steel shaft. This area above the hosel is the telltale sign for me, and for you. If you saw this club in person, you'd be able to tell right away. But that's more like a Bakelite plastic, obviously not wood, even though there's a wood grain here on the Pyratone, and a pretty good wood grain at that. You just need to see a couple of these clubs to know what's wood and what's not. And this is not wooden shaft. I'm a little surprised, I'll say, that this seller doesn't know that, because they sell golf clubs and have listed other clubs as Pyratone, but this one just must have slipped by them. Now, the one thing that I will say is there are sellers, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not trying to take advantage of people. And this seller's great because he has photos, or they have photos that show specifically the areas that you'd want to see to determine if it's really wooden or not. But sometimes you'll come across listings where it says wooden shaft, and that's the only photo of the shaft that you get. And if you don't ask for another one, you may never see this part of the golf club until you get it in the mail and you've spent money on a club that you thought was going to be wooden. So just bear that in mind. Look at more of these clubs. It's all about experience and seeing as many clubs as you can to build up that knowledge base. This is the other telltale sign for me. These perforated leather grips are always on Pyratone clubs and never on actual wooden shafted clubs. So that's another giveaway. But yeah, beware of the listing where it says wooden shaft in the title, doesn't have any other extra information in the description, and then just shows you one or two photos of the shaft and not the part of the shaft that you really need to see, which is right above the hosel. So that's that listing. Let's see what else we've got going on here. Here's another golf club that kind of trips people up. This seller seems to know that this is not a vintage antique. But if you're a buyer, and you're a new buyer and new to Hickory golf, you might look at this and think that you found a really cool old club. Couple of things to look at or be aware of with this one. If you see Phillips screws like this, that's at least no earlier than 1950s, because that's when they first started using those screws. I know that this company makes these clubs, or this is probably from the 1980s or 90s, just based on the graphics that are on this. Obviously, an antique club wouldn't have that kind of graphic on it. But a lot of times that kind of stuff is rubbed off on these, and all you see is the club itself without any information. So again, this is another one of those instances where you really want to see a lot of these clubs to understand what you're looking at before you buy. Okay, how do I get back out of this? There we go. All right, so keep scrolling through and see if anything else jumps out. I think that's probably good for this listing, or this search term. So that's kind of a general term to use. Other terms that I like to use on occasion to find those clubs that are under the radar would be just the word niblick. Because if you, again, are an estate sale picker and you look at a golf club and all you can read on it is niblick, that might be what you use in the description. And it might end up being a Tom Stewart club that they don't know is a Tom Stewart. Speaking of Tom Stewart, a lot of people who come across his clubs will list them as T. Stewart, because that's what's printed, that's what's actually stamped onto the club head. Not Tom Stewart, but T. Stewart. So that's a term that you can use to see if you can find some Tom Stewarts that are kind of under the radar. Let's see if I can find any of those. This might be one. And I say that just because all of the information that's in the title, these are all words that are on the club itself. So this person doesn't seem to have any extra knowledge about this golf club other than what they can read on the club head. And sometimes you'll see these clubs listed for buy it now prices that are really affordable. This one's actually right on the mark, I would say. Maybe a little high price-wise, but yeah, not the kind of deal I'm looking for. But yeah, that's another little tip. T. Stewart will yield some listings where the person doesn't necessarily know that it is a Tom Stewart. All right, let's go into search terms that actually will yield clubs where the seller knows exactly what they have. So I like to use the term antique golf, just antique golf. Again, look at the newly listed because this will show you what's the latest listings or what the latest listings are. And most of the people that you're going to see listing clubs this way know exactly what they have. Again, I'm not going to single out sellers that I think are purposefully leaving out information that would be important for a buyer to have, but I will single out a seller who I think you should be aware of and should shop from. So if you see any listings from stixnstuff, based in Durham, North Carolina, these are the listings of Bob Georgeade. You've probably heard me mention Bob Georgeade's name before on my channel. If you spend any time in Hickory golf, you're gonna come in contact with Bob Georgeade, either by buying a club from him or knowing somebody who has bought clubs from him. And I will say that there's probably nobody that I've learned more from about golf clubs than Bob Georgeade, mostly through his listings on eBay. And I'm going to go through why his listings are so great here in a second. But in the world of eBay golf club sellers, you're just not going to find a better one than Bob. There are a couple others that I'll mention in future videos that I feel just as positive about as Bob. But I think Bob is kind of the textbook example of how to list a golf club on eBay, how to list a Hickory golf club on eBay. And all of the things that he lists here is information that you should kind of file away in your head as questions to ask a seller if they don't list it in their listing. So let's just go through that right now. So first of all, in the title, we see Hickory shaft, Octoloni, St. Andrews, stripe top, 13 degrees. So right away we know what the degree is. We know that it's a driver, not just a wood. It's a driver, which means that it's not going to have a brass sole plate. Whoops. Well, yeah, it's not going to have a brass sole plate. I'll go to that photo. Yeah, I'll get there right now. Okay. So you see a driver just has this horn here, no brass sole plate. Problematic from a restoration perspective, because if you want to add weight to this, you have to add it visibly here in the center, drill a hole, put some lead or tungsten in there, and it's kind of, it's a noticeable repair. So I try to avoid drivers specifically. This is actually a pretty lofted driver. You don't normally find them at 13 degrees. But the things that you should look at, when you're looking at a club on eBay, you obviously want clear photos of the information that's listed. You can see that pretty clear on this. An interesting stamp here that shows the club was sold in Singapore by a retailer in Singapore, which is cool. Also, you'll notice there's an L. That L signifies ladies. Now, again, if you see a listing where you find a club with an L, but there's no reference to the fact that it's a ladies' club, now you'll know that, but be aware. Sometimes people try to obfuscate that because they know that it's not as appealing of a listing if it's known as a ladies' club. But you should know that from a weight perspective if you're buying the club to play. All right, so all we've done right now is look at the photos, and we've already got a ton of information off of that and the fact that it says 13 degrees in the title. But this is where Bob's listings really shine. He gives you every bit of information you could possibly want about this particular club. And he starts by telling you how long it is. So it's 40 1/4 inches playing length. He says it's an attractive high lofted driver. It is a very nice looking driver. He mentions the Robinson and Company Singapore stamp along with an L for ladies. So he'll tell you right off the bat, it's a ladies club, you know, gender, women. He tells you everything. He's not trying to hide anything from you here. Very good vintage condition. He tells you about the condition of the shaft. He says it's apparently original and it's marked Ochterlony, which is cool. He says it's straight, he sees no cracks, and it is tight at the hosel. He also gives you the flex. From what he can tell, it feels like a senior flex. Tells you that the leather wrap is probably vintage. And then finally gives you, again, the loft, 13 degrees, and he tells you the swing weight, A0 swing weight. Well, if I'm looking for a play club, this club is out for me. A driver at A0 swing weight is going to be really difficult to bring up to, you know, a playable swing weight. And he even kind of alludes to that here by saying that it's a very nice display club. If he thinks it's a good club for play, he'll mention that. And he does mention here in the second paragraph that if you're considering playing with the club, he suggests that whipping be added just above the hosel. However, like I said, if he thinks it's a good play club, then he'll mention that. And if he thinks it's a display club, he'll mention that too. Bob's very fair with his prices. So not only are you getting all the information he could possibly give you about the club, you're also getting the best deal you could probably get on a particular club. And yeah, I can't say enough positive about Bob. He's taught me a lot. He's a great guy. I've had some really good conversations with him at Golf Heritage Society events. And you should certainly, if you're going to do any shopping for clubs on eBay, start with Bob. And if you don't see what you're looking for, drop him a message and see if he does have it, because you might be surprised at what he's got. I have never seen his collection at his house, but I hear it's legendary, that it's just massive. So that's who we're going to single out for this particular video, is Bob Georgiade. All right, so let's kind of scroll through the rest here. I'll also mention too that Bob's listings are very easy to recognize because they always have this gray mesh behind the club. Or I believe this is one of his listings too. He'll put his clubs on his deck, and you'll get the wood slats of the deck. Let's make sure, yeah, sticks and stuff. So any pictures you see with the deck or the mesh, that's Bob. And again, I've got other friends on eBay that I'll mention in the future, but Bob deserves to be, in my opinion, number one to single out as a seller you should look for, because like I said, he's taught me pretty much everything I know about buying clubs. All right, so that's the term antique golf. And I think at that point, that's a lot of information for a first episode of this. Like I said, I'm going to do more of these because there's always interesting stuff popping up on eBay. But I think that's a good start. But of course, if you've got any questions about what I covered today, or what you'd like me to cover in future videos like this, let me know in the comments. Let me know what your best find on eBay is, and then I'd also be interested to hear what your worst find on eBay is. You know, everybody seems to have an eBay horror story when it comes to Hickory golf. Either the club was broken in the mail, or it just was not anything what they expected. I'll just tell you about, you know, my first purchase. I saw some clubs that looked like they were, you know, pretty good for play, but they didn't have any playing, you know, specs listed with it. And I didn't know that W stood for women back then. This was very early in my Hickory golf club buying. And so, yeah, I ended up buying a club that I probably paid 35 bucks for after shipping, that ended up becoming a wall hanger because it was too short, it was too light, and just did not do anything that I originally intended, you know, or wanted it to do when I bought it. So, yeah, that's a pretty common story for most people when they're first buying clubs. But, you know, feel free to drop me an email if you're interested in a specific listing. I'll tell you what I think of it. And yeah, I think that'll do it for this week. All right, well, we'll be back next week with another video. And until then, hope you take care, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, folks.